করে দিলাম, ঠিক আছে? রেকর্ডিংটা শুরু করুন।
অভিজিৎ দা শুরু করুন। হ্যাঁ,
অভিজিৎ আনমিউট করতে হবে। অভিজিৎ
আনমিউট করতে হবে।
ফোন করছে।
হয়েছে?
হ্যাঁ হয়েছে।
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ।
আচ্ছা, I think it is useless to introduce Sumantra Guha because I think everybody in the Eastern region as well as the other regions also know him. However, let us not waste time. We should start our program immediately. Carry on, Suman.
Yeah. So Sumanta, it is the platform is yours, as Abhijit has already described you as a man to be known by every members.
Thank you.
Especially you have been talking about ethics in so many of the webinars, and I have been privileged to have as a VCM coordinator or your panel motivator for the sessions. So many thanks and happy new year for the new members who have joined us late, and others, the participant who has taken their valuable time from this valuable Sunday morning and come for this VCM. So it's all you, Sumanta. I'll be there for you for the technical purpose. Devan will be last joining us by 11:30 or 12 o'clock.
Okay, no problem. Thank you so much. So am I audible, Suman? Huh?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes. At the very outset, I wish all the participants, all the delegates, a very happy new year 2021. And let us all the frustration, depression, and sorrow of 2020 get evaporated as early as possible, so that we march on to a new 2021. And let us hope that not only the economy of the country, but our professional brothers also, our fraternity also grows and flourishes and prospers in the year, in the calendar year 21, I would say. Not someone said that chartered accountants know only previous year and assessment year, but with January coming in, with the vaccine also in the pipeline and to be introduced very shortly, already the dry run has taken place in West Bengal also. So let us hope that we all should feel motivated, and we should not at all remain pessimistic, and we should try to face the challenges of this pandemic, and I'm sure that we will all come out of it in a very short span of time. Secondly, I would like to thank the convener of the 8x2 study circle, CEO Vijit Dutt, who has been running this study circle for a long period of time, and all of us, including myself, have had the privilege of addressing members in this study circle. Previously, it was being held physically at the second floor of the building, but unfortunately, due to the pandemic, it was not possible. I'm sure that Abhijitda is also contemplating when to start having physical programs, although the institute has given permission. But in spite of that, the various study circles are a bit skeptical of starting them immediately. But in due course of time, I think within the next month or so, or the last week of this month, people will start having physical meets. Like our regional conference also, which has now been shifted to 16th and 17th of January. We'll have a physical presence of 200 people, and the rest will be joining by virtual mode. So gradually the numbers will gradually increase of people joining physically, and we will enjoy the same camaraderie and bonhomie which we used to enjoy earlier, when we used to interact personally and physically with each other. Now, the subject to be discussed today, coming straight to the subject, I will speak for 1 hour 15 minutes to 1 hour 30 minutes, because we have to stick to the time. We have to finish at 1 p.m. And last 15 minutes we will keep for question answers and the other rituals to be required to complete the program. The topic today is Code of Ethics, and we will mainly be discussing the 12th edition of Code of Ethics, brought out by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India in 2019. And the 3 volumes, it has now been brought out in 3 volumes: volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. Volume 1 was actually made compulsory from the 1st of April 2020, but due to the pandemics, since the lockdown started from March 2020, it was deferred to 1st of July 2020. The code 2 of the the volume 2 of the Code of Ethics was also made compulsory from 1st of July 2020. And the 3rd volume of the Code of Ethics contains case laws only, which relate to the domestic provisions. Volume 1 does not relate to domestic provisions. It relates to provisions which are prevalent in India as well as globally. Volume 2 of the Code of Ethics strictly are related to domestic provisions, Indian provisions, and how the Code of Ethics will be administered in our country. And volume 3, as I said, is comprises of case laws only. But when this Code of Ethics started, the institute was formed in 1949, and Code of Ethics was introduced in 1963 in a different format. It was called Code of Conduct. So when people like me or Kolanda, we appeared for our CA final, we all appeared, we all sat for our CA final exams and answered questions which were based on Code of Conduct, actually, because we passed earlier than 2001, and all those who have qualified post 2001 have answered questions based on Code of Ethics, because the institute renamed in 2001 the Code of Conduct to Code of Ethics. And in 2001, the 9th edition was introduced, and in 2009 the 11th edition was introduced, and which was made in line with the IESBA, that is, in other words, the IESBA, which is a standard setting body of the IFAC, which is known as the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants. So with these introductory remarks, let us start the slides, and then I'll be explaining the various provisions. I will only be sticking to the important issues which relate directly to our profession, because within a span of 1.5 hours, it is not possible to cover everything, because actually it requires 3 hours of deliberation for volume 1 only, a full day deliberation for volume 2, and a 3-hour to 6-hour deliberation for discussing the case laws on the 3rd volume. Although the institute has mandated a 2-hour compulsory time limit for discussing Code of Ethics as such, but the program organizing units can have larger time frames also to discuss volume-wise Code of Ethics also, which would be beneficial to professionals at large. So Shuman, if you could start the slideshow, please. Shuman, you are there? Yes. Shuman? Yes. So let us start the slideshows. See, as I said, the Code of Ethics 2009. No, this is okay. Go to the next slide. This is just an introductory slide. The Code of Ethics 2009 had 2 parts, A and B, and that was valid till 30th June 2020. Why? Because the Code of Ethics 2019 came into effect from 1st July 2020. And what was A and what was B? A was taken from the IFAC, from the IESBA Code of Ethics, which is the standard setting body of IFAC, because India and the institute being a part of IFAC, they had a moral international obligation to adopt the IFAC Code of Ethics, and hence part A of the code was aligned with them. It was not purely adopted. It was, I would say it was converged, because we changed some parts of the code of ethics of IESBA or IFAC in part A also in 2009. But now that is not important because 2009 we have done away with, we have now come to 2019, and part B was totally domestic provisions. And now it, as I said, it has been divided into volume 1, 2 and 3. A corresponds to volume 1, B corresponds to volume 2, and volume 3 is separately case laws. And why a change was required? Because the last code of ethics was brought out in 2009, and after that a lot of changes have taken place. Changes in Companies Act 2013 was introduced, then various economic and commercial laws in the in the form of say Prevention of Money Laundering Act, also, although it was there in 2002, but it didn't take any significant shape prior to 2009. And there were other laws, as I said, labor laws came into force. The Benami Act 2016 came into force, and various other commercial and the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act has come into force very recently. So all these changes took place in the statute, but our code was static also as on 2009. So the need was felt to update the code significantly so that we are updated at least till 2019. Now changes will take place because because change is something which is constant, which is permanent. So maybe at a later stage, with even more changes taking place, we may once again revise the code in future. But all the 3 volumes are available at ici.org. The hard copy of volume 1 is only available. Volume 2 and 3 are only available in soft copies because after the pandemic, the printing work has stopped, slightly stopped, but in due course those hard copies will also be made available. But the soft copies are available in the institute website. If you visit the committee on ethics, you will find if you visit the ethical standards board, you will, if you go to the website, you will find all the 3 volumes are there, and you can download them for your reading at your leisure time. So next slide, Shuman. Now, after this code came into force, there was a council meeting on 30th of June to 1st of July 2020, and it was decided that since the pandemic is still continuing, although unlock, the process of unlock started from 1st of June, but since the impact was still there, the institute felt that for members to comply with these 3 issues which are mentioned in the next paragraph will be difficult to comply for the members, both in service as well as in practice. It will be difficult for them to comply with. So for the time being, these 3 important provisions of the code were kept in abeyance, has been kept deferred, and no further notification has come as to when it will be applicable. But we need to know these, because on any point of time now, since the situation is gradually becoming normal, we can expect that these laws, these 3 issues will once again be made applicable from very soon, because the government also, since we are under the Ministry of Finance, the ministry also knows that these 3 issues have not been have been kept in abeyance, and the government may request the institute to make them mandatory, say from the next financial year, from 1/4/21 onwards. So so we will be discussing the important provisions of the volume 1 of the code, which will include these provisions also. Next, Shuman. I've already discussed, this is the 12th edition. We have already discussed this issue. The 2019 code is the 12th edition. Next. now we start with volume 1, as I was saying. Now, this is the institute. This is the institute approved PPT, standardized PPT on code of ethics. I always use the standardized PPT of the institute, and there the PPT has been prepared in such a manner that the 2009 code has been compared with the 2019 code. Rather, the opposite, the 2019 code has been compared with the 2009 code. Now, 2009 code, let us look at the right hand side, not the left hand side. There are 5 important provisions which we will be discussing today only, because these are the most 5 important provisions. There are various other provisions which I will not deal with due to paucity of time. This is responding to non-compliance of laws and regulations, which I said has been kept deferred till the time being. Restriction on taxation services to audit clients, this has also been kept in abeyance for the time being. Prohibition on management responsibilities to the audit clients, this has not been deferred. This is still in force and mandatory from 1st July 2020. Safeguards on fees of single client, this has also been deferred. Of course, subject to review, they are saying there could be a review also, maybe. And a duty of accountants in case of breach of independent standards. So we'll be discussing these 4 or 5 provisions which are there, and that will complete volume 1. And then we will be taking up the important provisions relating to important domestic provisions which we encounter in our day-to-day professional lives. That will be volume 2. Next. This is clerical in nature, not much. 1 minute. Yes, this I think we should see. Yeah. IESB, as I was saying, they use the word professional accountants. We are also using, we in the code, we have used the word an individual who is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. And ISB code uses the term, as I said, professional accountants in business for members who are employees. But for simplicity sake, we have, and since the Chartered Accountants Act 1949 defines a professional accountant in service, a professional accountant in business actually means professional accountant in service. And we have used the term professional accountant in service in all the terms of the volume, in volume 1 of the Code of Ethics. Next. So in a nutshell, what we have, you have heard from me so far, part A, oh, this is 2009. Let us skip this because 2009, I'm not going to deal any further. Yes, this is the 2019, part 1, applicable to all professional accountants. That means those who are in service, those who are in practice, it applies to all. And business means, part 2 is business. Business means in service. Part 3 in public practice means in practice. And there are certain independent standards which we will take up during the course of this lecture. Next. Now, let us only deal with the 19 things. Code of Ethics 19 volume 1 has been issued as a guideline to the council. Now, what is the meaning of the word guideline to the council? Guideline to the council means that if there is any violation of the guideline to the council, then non-compliance of such provisions by members will be deemed as a violation of clause 1 of part 2 of second schedule of the CA Act 1949. And that would tantamount to professional misconduct. So a member of the institute, whether in practice or not, shall be deemed to be guilty of professional misconduct if he contravenes any of the provisions of this act or the regulations made thereunder or any guidelines issued by the council. So next. Now let us come to the first point, responding to non-compliance with other laws and regulations. It refers to any act of omission or commission committed by a client or employer contrary to prevailing laws or regulations. Now, as NOCLAR is applicable to chartered accountants who are in practice and who are doing attest function, it is also applicable to employees of the client. So in other words, if there are chartered accountant employees of the client and non-compliance of other laws and regulations like non-compliance of FEMA, non-compliance of PMLA, non-compliance of labor laws, non-compliance of other of Benami Property Act and so on and so forth. If these are not followed, then if these are not reported in the audit report issued by the chartered accountant in practice, it will be a violation. It will be a professional misconduct, not only of the chartered accountant who is signing the accounts, but also if such laws have not been complied with by chartered accountant employees of the employer. That means the chartered accountant employees of the client, then those chartered accountant employees can also be booked for violating the guidelines of the council, and professional misconduct, a case of professional misconduct can be instituted against them also. Next. So now there has been a change of guard, so I can understand now it is 11:30. Divan has taken over. Divan, welcome.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yes. Now, as I said, now the NOCLAR, although it has been deferred, was in any case made applicable only till now, made applicable only to listed entities, and it is applicable only to audit assignments, not any other assignment. And in case of PAs in service, as I said, professional accountants in service, applicable to employees of listed entities also. I have just now mentioned it. Next, Divan, next. Yes. 1 minute. Example. Yes. Now, so a few examples have been given by the institute that what are the laws that can be said has been violated by the client, which should find a place in our audit report. If you see the last point, you will see examples of laws and regulations required to be addressed are fraud, obviously, corruption and bribery, money laundering, I've already mentioned, terrorist financing and proceeds of crime, securities, markets and trading, etc. But I would add, as I said, I would add other commercial and economic laws also, like FEMA, like labor laws, like Benami Property Act. So all these laws also would find a place, violation of all those laws also would find a place, should find a place in your audit report if you find any deviation from the laws as committed by the client of yours. But it will only deal with commercial, financial and economic laws, not any laws which are nowhere related to financial reporting and so on and so forth. Next, Divan. Yes. Now, there was no slide in my selection. There was no slide in front. Yes. Yeah, I think, yeah, key audit partner. You mentioned this key audit partner. তোমায় দুবেন তোমায় স্লাইড নাম্বারগুলো বলে দিয়েছে তো সুমন না কোন স্লাইড নাম্বার yes ঠিক আছে now the concept of key audit partner has also been introduced by the 2019 code. There are the 3 things have been defined. EP means an engagement partner. There should be an engagement quality control review partner, means a review partner. Obviously, when an audit is done of a listed entity, there is an engagement partner of the firm and there is a review partner as well. And a new concept has also come called the key audit partner, means a partner who is dealing with the key audit issues relating to the client. Now let us come to the next slide, firm rotation. The firm rotation has been stipulated by the Companies Act 2013. The 2009 code contained requirements of relation to partner rotation, but no firm rotation requirements were there in the code. Now, Companies Act 2013 has stipulated firm rotation, we all know. And the 2019 code also incorporates firm rotation requirements by the separate, and under the revised code, partner rotation will coexist along with audit firm rotation wherever prescribed by a statute, of course. Suppose there will be certain guidelines which are required to be followed, but it will obviously be mandatory for firms to go for partner rotations also. That means the same partner of the firm cannot keep on auditing the same client for years together. There has to be rotation amongst partners also, but wherever prescribed by a statute could mean, or other regulator could mean by SEBI, by RBI, so on and so forth. They can prescribe rotation of partners as well. Next, changes in partner rotation. Come to this one. Yes, here the 2019 code suggests that that 5 years cooling off. There should be a 5 years cooling off of the engagement partner. That means a partner who is engaged, who is an engagement partner, after 5 years he should there should be a cooling of there should be a cooling period of 5 years. Similarly, for EQCR, means engagement quality control review partner, there should be a cooling of 3 years, and for all other key audit partners there should be a 2 years cooling off. So this is what the code prescribes. Next. Yes. So we have the next point, which I said was very important, was management responsibilities. Now, this has not been deferred. This is applicable from 1st July 2020. And it says, in bold, it says, the firm shall not assume a management responsibility for an audit client. That means your job is not to run the business of the client. Now, what happens is, with chartered accountants mainly, we are married to our clients. That is the problem with chartered accountants in practice in general. Be it a very big firm, be it a medium-sized firm or a small firm, we are married to our clients. For whatever reasons, we are married to our clients. And the problem is that at times, unknowingly also, we try to assume the management responsibility. It means as if we are without any requirement, we are advising clients. I won't use the word advise, as if we are running the business as if on behalf of the client. At times we do so. I have seen many cases where in the emails, in the official emails of various clients, chartered accountants have mentioned their own email ID, and all mails come to them, and it doesn't come to the client from various regulatory authorities, so on and so forth. So this is something which one has to avoid. You cannot take the responsibility, management responsibility. You can only do administrative services when requested by the client, obviously in exchange of professional fees. And what are the examples of administrative services? Like word processing services, preparing administrative or statutory forms for client approval, submitting such forms, monitoring statutory filing dates, and advising on audit client of those dates. So we must know the Lakshman Rekha. The Lakshman Rekha is that our job is advisory and administrative in nature. We should not be held responsible for the gains of business or the losses of the business of the client. The client has to manage his or her own business, and we should not step into the shoes of the proprietor or the partner or the director of our client and start running the business as if we are co-partners or co-owners of the entity. Next, Divan. Yes. Now, taxation services to audit clients. This, I think, we have detail. The details are in the next slide. This has also been deferred. This has also been deferred due to the pandemic. Three things were deferred, as I said. NOCLAR has been deferred, relative size of the client, and taxation services. Now, this also has been deferred, but let's see what the code mentions about this. It says that if you are an auditor of a entity, and if you are engaged in tax return preparation, there is no threat. I'll come to the threats just after this. There is no threat means there is no, there are 5 types of threats: self-interest threat, self-review threat, advocacy threat, familiarity threat, and intimidation threat. There are no slides for that. I'll just explain you later on, but there are no threats of independence if you prepared the return. Tax calculation for the purpose of preparing accounting entries done by the auditor. It creates a self-review threat because you are doing the tax calculation for the purpose of preparing accounting entries. You are an auditor, you are a statutory auditor. The responsibility of preparing the accounts is with the management, not with you. And if you make tax calculations and then once again make revised tax calculations with the purpose to change the tax, either you want to reduce it or you want to enhance it, whatever may be the case, it creates a self-review threat. And the institute says that if you are auditor of the client, you should not be carrying out the second function. Then tax planning and other tax advisory services might create self-review advocacy threat. Appropriate safeguards to be adopted, as for example, using professionals who are not in the audit team. Like suppose for tax planning and other tax advisory services, you should not be engaging or employing the team who is doing the audit. There should be separate partners or separate people as such who will be looking after the tax part. Suppose you have done the audit, the accounts are complete. Now, if the client engages you to prepare the tax returns or do some tax planning or any other tax or advisory services, then you should give the accounts, the draft accounts or the final accounts, whatever may be the case, to the person who is not a part of your audit team, who was not a part of your audit team when you conducted the audit, but to your tax partner who is going to look after those issues and advise the client accordingly. Next, Divan. Tax services including valuation might perform only where the result of the valuation will not have a direct effect on the financial statements. Because actually we should not be doing any tax services which involves the valuation of a particular asset. And assistance in the resolution of tax disputes might create a self-review or advocacy threat. Appropriate safeguards to be adopted not to provide if involves acting as advocate for the audit client or amount involved are material to the financial statements on which the firm will express an opinion. Now here I have some difference with the institute also, because assistance in the resolution of tax disputes, which includes Vivad se Viswas scheme, which includes settlement commission, which also may include appearance before tax authorities at the time of scrutiny, tax authorities at the time of CIT appeals, tax authorities at the time of appearing before the ITAT, not High Court, because we are not entitled to appear before the High Court. So we are entitled up to the ITAT. So there could be an advocacy threat. There is no doubt about it. There could be. But mostly the clients rely on the chartered accountant firm who are their auditors to also take up the tax matters. So it would be, in the best practice would be to tell your tax partners to do it, and not because if you have been engaged with an assignment of audit, you should not jump and normally take part in the assessment process. Of course, nowadays things have simplified to a great extent. We now have e-assessments coming up. Now you don't need to visit the income tax offices. E-assessment, e-appeals all have come up. So it has made our life easier also. And I think this does not pose a major threat after the introduction of e-assessment as well as e-appeals. Next. Yes, now we come to threats. Now, as I said, there are 5 threats that has not been mentioned in the slide. I don't know why they have not mentioned. I will just tell you the 5 threats which are there for a practicing chartered accountant. And the threats are self-interest threat. Self-interest threat means if you, no, don't change this, keep it like this. Safeguards, we'll be discussing the safeguards which are there. Self-interest threat means if you quote very low fees, then there is a self-interest threat. If there is a relationship with the client, you know, your grandfather used to know the grandfather of the client, and it has gone over generations and all. Obviously, there has to be some self-interest threat which will develop. You cannot avoid that. Self-review threat, that means you cannot be the maker as well as the checker. You cannot be the internal auditor as well as the statutory auditor. In any case, our code does not allow, but you will be surprised to know that the IFAC code of ethics, which is the IESBA for that matter, the IESBA at times have said that in specific cases, the internal auditor can also become statutory auditor, but in our case, it cannot. And for that, I would just like to add that the CAG and RBI says that suppose if you have completed the audit of a particular public sector bank or a public sector undertaking, be it central statutory audit or be it branch audit, there has to be a 1-year cooling after statutory audit for taking up any internal audit function. That is what the CAG and RBI says, and that finds a place in the guidance note on independence of auditors. We have a separate publication, guidance note on independence of auditors, which says that after statutory audit, there has to be a 1-year cooling. But suppose you are doing the internal audit of a particular client and you are allotted statutory audit, then there is no problem. You can immediately take up the statutory audit after resigning from internal audit. That also is allowed by the competent authorities, and that is also finds a place in the guidance note on independence of auditors. And as far as independent directors are concerned, if you are an independent director for company appointed under section 149 of the Companies Act, after 2 years only, you can become the statutory auditor. So after the expiry of your term as an independent director of a company, after 2 years only, there has to be a cooling of 2 years, then only you can take up any statutory audit assignment. So this was self-review. Advocacy threat, I've already said, acting as an advocate, representation matters, but that I think is gradually getting diluted after e-assessment and e-appeals. That is my personal view, though. The institute, I think, requires to deliberate further how far advocacy threat would be a threat at all. Familiarity threat, obviously, suppose if your spouse is the CEO of the client and then you do the audit, then obviously it will tantamount. Devan, don't change the slides. We'll be discussing the safeguards. Yes, keep it here. I'm discussing something which are not in the slides actually. Familiarity threat, if your spouse is a CEO of the client, and the ex-partner being, or your ex-partner who has retired from the firm is an influential officer in that concern, then obviously there is a familiarity threat which cannot be avoided. We should try to avoid familiarity. What are the safeguards I'll be discussing, which is there in the slides. Then there is something called intimidation threat. Suppose the client is threatening you for various reasons and saying that I will remove you if you don't do this and don't do that. So this is an intimidation threat which we should take care of, which is very important. We should take care of. And what are the safeguards? There are 3 safeguards that you can do. Is first, identified threats must be addressed in one of the 3 ways. Eliminate circumstances creating the threats. You try to eliminate the circumstances which is creating the threats, and apply safeguards safeguards to mitigate the threat, and if at all you cannot do the above two, then you have to decline or end the service. So these are the three steps. The third is the ultimate step, the most drastic step, but try to eliminate the circumstances creating the threats by applying certain safeguards. And then if you can't, if those don't work, then you have to decline the service. Next. The next now, yes. You can skip these, yeah. Now fees also, this has also been kept in abeyance, but let us see what the provision says. It says that from a single client, your fees should not be more than 15% from one audit client. Suppose you have a turnover of say 10 lakhs, it is you cannot have a fee structure where from one client you are getting 1,50,000 or more. Now there are certain exceptions where this rule would not apply. That is where total fees of the firm is less than 5 lakhs per annum, means for smaller firms. And in the case of audit of government companies, public undertakings, nationalized banks, public financial institutions, or where appointment of auditors are made by the government, in those cases, this will not apply. So in other words, say for instance, it says less than 5 lakhs per annum, comma, and in the case of audit. So suppose if you have audit fees of 10 lakhs, let us say, you remove 10 lakhs is more than 5 lakhs, so that is not applicable. But what is applicable is you can remove the fees you have earned out of the 10 lakhs that you have earned by audit of government companies, public sector undertakings, nationalized banks, public financial institutions, and come at the net fees, arrive at the net fees, and see whether any one client from whom you are rendering professional service that exceeds 15% of that net figure. So if you have been rendering services worth 3 lakh rupees and your total fees is 10 lakhs, so your net fees from services rendered to other clients other than those mentioned here comes to 7 lakhs, and 15% of 7 lakhs comes to 1,05,000 rupees. So you should ensure that it should not be more than 15%. But I have been made to understand, and in the earlier slide you must have seen, that the institute is also contemplating to maybe slightly increase this percentage, because in the earlier code this was 40% from a single client, and they have reduced it drastically to 15. So it could so happen that a small amendment may take place where, because this clause has already been deferred, number one, and kept in abeyance, but due to the pandemic. But even after that, the institute has also said that we can sort of revise the percentage. Next. Before I go to this KYC thing, KYC te rakho. Before I go to the KYC thing, certain discussions were going on in WhatsApp groups that the institute has issued a guideline, paragraph 410.7 and all, that if there are unpaid fees from the client, then it tantamounts to a loan from the client, and whether we should take up the assignment or not. The institute in its code has said that if there are unpaid fees, then because you have been working for 5-7 years and you have not been paid fees, for a substantial period of time, then it creates a self-interest threat, and the institute says that you should take all steps to ensure that you get the payment as early as possible. But if it goes on, then you have to decide whether you can continue with the assignment or not. But it is not that you are prohibited to take up the audit assignment of the client. It is not that, because this message was doing the WhatsApp rounds that you should not take up the assignment at all. It is not that. The institute says that you have to take all necessary steps to ensure that the payment comes. But if you are quite convinced that the payments will not come, because it is a code, you have to apply it in letter and spirit, and you have to, it cannot be defined. Basically, a code basically cannot be defined. Your behavior will describe and explain whether you are adhering to the code or not. And and you should try to ensure that the fees are paid, and if you feel that the fees will not be paid, then it is best to leave the client altogether, because in any case, when if some other professional is appointed and he seeks a no objection from you, then you will be discussing, when we'll be discussing the domestic provisions, then if there are unpaid fees, then obviously the fees will be it has to be paid to you, because then the other chartered accountant who is appointed in your place will not be able to undertake the assignment, because there has been non-payment of statutory audit fees to the previous auditor. The code also says that from 1/1/17 we must have a file of a KYC. We must take the KYC of the client, which is quite understandable. We nowadays take the KYC of the clients because for income tax work, for audit work and all work, we must understand the existence of the client. We must see whether the client has a full-fledged KYC system in place. So that is understandable. That has also been made mandatory for all attest functions with effect from 1st of January 2017. Next. Divan, next. So in a nutshell, before I start volume 2, I'll just say we have discussed NOCLAR. So we have discussed NOCLAR. We have discussed relative fees, which is 15%. We have discussed taxation services of the clients. We have discussed management services one should not perform for the client. And we have also discussed the independence, the independent standards, the 5 threats. So this is basically everything that can be discussed in a reasonable period of time as far as volume 1 is concerned. Now let us come to the domestic provisions, that is volume 2 of the Code of Ethics. Anyway, so let us start with the volume 2 now, which is the domestic provisions. Why changes were sought? Because, as I said, since 2009 to 2019, a lot of laws and regulations have undergone a change, and in order to keep ourselves updated, our publications updated with the changing times, the code was rightfully updated and revised and made mandatory from 1st of July 2020. Next slide. Now, 5 most important structural changes over the 2009 code. All paragraphs, numbered, titles, provision, new appendices, all disciplinary cases removed and forming part of volume 3 and alignment with Code of Ethics 2019. That is okay. Let us go ahead. MCS. Let us go to MCS. What is mentioned here? In MCS, I can say in management consultancy services, I think it appears elsewhere also, but I will just mention that 2 new services have been added. One is valuation services, because as you know, under the valuation services, chartered accountants can be registered valuers of companies. Of course, they can be valuers only of financial assets and securities. We cannot be valuers for land and building and plant and machinery, for which other professionals can be, but we can be valuers there under section 247 of the Companies Act. That has been permitted under management consultancy services. And we can also be insolvency resolutional professionals. We can also be insolvency professionals. That means by passing the exams of the IBBI, we can become insolvency professionals. That we can also become. So those two inclusions have been made in the 2019 revised definition of the of management consultancy services under section 224 of the CA Act 1949. And a small change has been made as far as insurance financial advisory services are concerned. The word not including insurance agency has been included. That is a minor change, but the main two changes are valuation services and insolvency. That has been included. Next. Here one thing I would like to say, let us forget about it, IFAC. Very recently, you must have seen that in the institute, there is one regulation 53B of the CA regulations, which says that we can go for multidisciplinary partnerships, MDP. Now, the regulations say that we can be partners, or we can take partners who are cost accountants, company secretaries, advocates, actuaries, engineers, so on and so forth. But the regulatory bodies of those institutes were not permitting chartered accountants to be taken in, because as the Institute of Chartered Accountants is a regulatory body, each and every profession has their own regulatory body. They also are a regulatory body. They have regulatory bodies. So far, those regulatory bodies were not permitting chartered accountants to be taken in as partners. But very recently, if you have seen a white paper, I shouldn't say, an exposure draft has been released by the institute, which says that we can take partners who are cost accountants and company secretaries. 45 days time has been given by the institute for comments, for public comments, because the Institute of Cost Accountants of India and the Institute of Company Secretaries of India have now given the go ahead that cost accounting firms as well as company secretary firms can also take chartered accountants as partners. So this is a welcome change that has taken place. It was passed in 2014, this multidisciplinary partnership, but for some reason the other bodies were not willing to be a part of us. But now the cost accountants and the company secretaries, these two institutes at least, have given the green signal, and that is why the draft regulations have come, and it is there in public domain in the institute site, and you can give your comment also within 45 days. It has come, I think, 10-15 days earlier only, so there is enough time. You can give your public comments, and after that the rules and other regulations will get finalized, and we can now take in cost accountants, company secretaries as partners of our firms. Similarly, cost accountants and company secretary firms can also take chartered accountants if they desire so. So next, Devan. Yes, this is important. There are certain prohibitions in the revised code. It says that members being directors in companies, members being political parties, members of political parties or CSL in political parties holding different positions in clubs or other organizations, not permitted to mention these positions, as they would be violative of section 7 of the Act. So if you are a chartered accountant in practice, you cannot write that you are members of a political party, or you are a member of the CSL of a political party, so on and so forth. But what is permissible is you can write in your visiting card insolvency professional or registered valuer, because those are permitted by the institute and those can be written. For council and regional council members, this is not very important that you can write the highest position. Let us skip this. Let us go to the next slide, Divan. Retirement of partners also you skip. This is not very important. Next one. Yeah, this is very important. Referral fees amongst members. Yes. Previously, the 2009 code was silent, but now it is permitted as a commentary to clause 3. Now we can take referral fees from clients. Say, for instance, if X, Mr. X, the chartered accountant, refers a particular case which he doesn't want to do, or he is prohibited to do due to conflict of interest, or perhaps that is not his usual domain, he refers some work to someone, then he can charge referral fees. And if he pays referral fees, the other person, the other chartered accountant pays referral fees, then it will be permitted under the revised code. This is clause 3 and 4 of part 1 of the first schedule. It allows. And MDP, I just now said, despite regulation 53A and 50, MDP is not allowed in regulators of other professions also allow, and ICAI issues modalities. So now, as I said, cost accountants and company secretaries have come forward, and the process and it is going to see the light of the day in a very short span of time. But regarding LLP, there is some restrictions that a member in practice, a CA in practice, cannot become a partner or a designated partner in an LLP which does not do professional work, which is not doing any professional work. The member is not permitted to join an LLP, but a member, the heading says no, it should be not equivalent of director simpliciter in partnerships. Means, but if you are a director simpliciter in a company, if you are not a whole-time director, if you are only a director simpliciter, means you are not taking a director's remuneration, you are not engaging in the day-to-day affairs of the company, you are not signing checks on behalf of the company, you are not taking decisions on behalf of the company, but you are only attending board meetings and taking sitting fees, then you are a director simpliciter. And even if you are a chartered accountant in practice, regulation 190A of the CA regulations in any case permitted you to become a director simpliciter, but it does not allow a member in practice to be a partner in an LLP which is not doing professional work of accountancy. If you are a director simpliciter in a company which is engaged in manufacturing also, that is permitted, because you are not engaging yourself in the day-to-day functioning of that company. Next. Now this is very important, guidance on tenders. We all know that there is a notification dated 7th April 2016, which is mentioned here, that for statutory audit of entities, you are not supposed to quote your audit fees if the minimum audit fees has not been mentioned in the tender document. So that has to be followed in letter and spirit. And there are many cases which have been complained to in the institute, and many disciplinary cases are lying before the disciplinary committee, where members or chartered accountant firms have quoted against statutory audit assignments where the minimum audit fees was not mentioned in the tender document. What you can do in this case, suppose you find a situation where the minimum audit fees has not been mentioned, you write to the client and say that you cannot respond to such a tender because the institute doesn't permit you. And if he says, or if he keeps silent within a reasonable period of time, say 1 or 2 days, because normally these tenders come out and you get only 10-12 days to respond to such tenders in any case. And if he keeps silent, or he sends that could be the case, that is your problem, not our problem. We will not mention minimum audit fees or something like that, he writes. Then you are permitted to write to the Professional Development Committee of the Institute with the tender advertisement and your copy of your letter, and the Institute on your behalf will voluntarily write to the, on your request, will write to the client directly stating that no chartered accountant in practice can respond to your tender because they will be violating, it is a guideline to the council, and any violation, as I said, would attract disciplinary action, and hence no chartered accountant can respond to such tenders. Because what has happened, many of my chartered accountant friends have said that they have done so, and the clients have said, the so-called clients have said that why you are not responding, we are getting applications from other chartered accountants, they are not saying anything, why you are complaining and saying that minimum audit fees is not required. So don't get into an argument with those clients. You write to the institute and inform, and the institute will write to the client to include the minimum audit fees in the tender document. And as far as exorbitant EMD, there are FAQs on tenders also. You can see the institute website. On the 17th of June, you can note the date, 17 June 2016, dated FAQs are there on tenders. You can go through them. Those FAQs actually explain this notification properly. And as far as exorbitant EMD is concerned, the Ethical Standards Board may look on a case-to-case basis. But nowadays, for bigger assignments at times, the clients at times ask for higher EMDs, for which the institute actually is not in a proper position to intervene. That is also true. Anyway, let us go to the next slide. Use of CP on visiting cards. You are only permitted to mention qualifications of accounting institutes which have MRA or MOU with the ICI. So if there is a mutual recognition agreement or a memorandum of understanding with the professional body, then only you can write those in your visiting cards. Otherwise, you cannot mention those in your visiting cards. Next. Sponsoring activities. Now the revised code says that a member or a firm, a member or a firm is not permitted to sponsor an event. However, they may sponsor an event conducted by a program organizing unit of ICI, provided it has prior approval of CPE. Say, for instance, we are having the Eastern India Regional Council EIRC conference. Devan, it is also for you. We are having an EIRC conference, a regional conference of that magnitude, and a member or a particular firm wants to sponsor that program. A member or a firm can do so because members sponsoring activities relating to CSR may mention their individual names with prefix CA. However, the mention of firm name or CA logo is not permitted. That is relating to CSR, of course, but as far as program is concerned, members of firms not permitted to until and unless it has a prior approval of CPE. So the regional conference has prior approval of CPE, and hence members of firms are permitted to sponsor an event if they want to. Next. And as I said, for CSR, they cannot use the logo, but they can use the name of the firm or the member. Now, advertisement nowadays has been made totally banned. Educational videos may be uploaded, but provisions of IC announcement 18517 says there is a total ban on advertisement of coaching or teaching activities has been incorporated. Next, this slide, yes, advertisement, other changes. একটু আগেরটা দেখাও তো, এইটা, this one. This advertisement, this says that members' firm's name may be allowed in TV movie credits provided not mentioned differently from other persons, and sharing firm details in an interview. Suppose you are called for an interview by any TV channel or anything of that sort. it says that any detail to be given only on a specific question and of factual nature only. You cannot blah blah sort of advertise the activities of your firm and all. If the moderator, or you can only mention the details of the firm in as if you are stating facts only and not intending to advertise the achievements of your firm. Next, advertisements, other changes are also there. If you, yes, it says that only see the new part, don't go for the existing. Articles and presentation included in commentary, professional attainments prohibited, however use of prefix of CA is allowed. And this is important, considering the need of interpersonal socialization. Suppose your firm is having a silver jubilee or a diamond jubilee or a golden jubilee and things like that, it may be published in the newspaper. There is nothing wrong in it, in publishing that. Because social media has become very strong nowadays, which was not the case in 2009. So these changes were bound to happen, and it has rightly been incorporated. Next. Size illumination of signboard. There were certain restrictions on signboard. It should not smack of advertisement. Basically, you should not have a huge signboard. And what is written in the revised code is, while keeping in mind the appropriate visibility and illumination of the signboard, because many people had complained that some chartered accountants in remote areas are using signboards so big, and they are decorated and illuminated in such a manner that it smacks of advertisement and not stating facts. But the new code says that for appropriate visibility and illumination, so that if a person goes near the office, a person should be able to identify the place where he has to go. That illumination, so far to that extent, illumination is permitted in a signboard. Next. নেটওয়ার্কে এটা অতটা ইম্পর্টেন্ট নয় এখনো। আচ্ছা নেটওয়ার্কে, আচ্ছা এটা কি, যাও একটু এক মিনিট। নেটওয়ার্ক, it says that reference of revised network guidelines. The revised network guidelines are still, I think it has not come yet. The revised guidelines have not come. Some revised guidelines are being worked upon. Those have not come yet. That will come. Then only we will. That will automatically become applicable. But it is not permissible for firms to join networks not registered with the institute by whatever name called. Of course, this is very routine in nature. You can go to the modes of communication. This is important. Let us go to the modes of communication. Yes. Now, there was one slide in advertisement which said that font size should not exceed 14 and all. The write-up that you can give, just go to the previous one or two slides if there is anything mentioned there. Just one, just prior to this, it is not there. No? I think it will come later on. I think that slide, I cannot recollect. That was on advertisement actually, which says that. One minute. I think there is a. Anyway, let us come to mode of communication. We will go to that later on. Now, this is a very important clause because a lot of disciplinary cases come. People say that I was the auditor of a particular concern, and what happened was no one communicated with me, and I came to know that some other chartered accountant has conducted the audit, which I strongly resist, and I would complain, and so on and so forth to the institute. So this is part 1, schedule 1, clause 8, a very important clause, and there are certain revisions that have taken place. What are the revisions that have taken place? You kindly look at the bold part only. That acknowledgement of the communication from retiring auditor via email address registered with the institute or the last known official email address is permitted, and through unique identification number has not yet been introduced. Let us go to the next slide. It has been given properly. Go to the next slide. Yeah. No, there is a table, I think. After this, yes. Yes. Now, yes, keep it here. No, keep it here. Yes. Now, addressing peculiar circumstances while communicating. This is the most important slide, I would say, in the entire presentation. Say, for instance, you are the incoming auditor, means some client has approached you and says that there was a previous auditor, but we want to appoint you. Now, what you should do, you will have to communicate with the previous auditor. Of course, the provision says that you can be appointed, but if there are unpaid statutory audit fees, then you cannot be appointed until and unless the client has cleared the pending statutory audit fees of the erstwhile or the previous auditor. But it says you write to someone, and the facts are that premises are locked. Now, the existing 2009 code, the earlier code, was silent on this. If premises are locked, what will happen? That gave rise to a lot of, I would say, litigation. Now, what the revised code says, communication received back by the incoming auditor with office found locked written on the registered AD post shall be deemed to be as delivered. So that means it will be deemed to be delivered if you get back the letter saying that premises were locked. Now, form not found at the given registered address. If communication sent with remarks, no such office exists at this address, and address is registered with the institute, it is deemed to be delivered unless the retiring auditor proves that it was not really served and that he was not responsible for such non-service. Now, in this case, some members ask me this question. Just 1 minute. It says that if communication sent with the remarks, no such an address is registered with the institute. Now, how will I know whether the address is registered with the institute or not? Because then you have to correspond with the institute. Even if you can't do so, if you could see the last audit report and find the letterhead, and even if you communicate in that letterhead, that also will suffice. Although it says that registered with the institute, that means it was registered till the time that auditor was there. Even if you correspond there, then no one can actually haul you up for non-communication. So this should be made very clear. And communication in case of certification, it was a healthy practice, one said earlier. Now it has been dispensed with, but you can always correspond if you want to, but it is not required for any certification. Now let us go to clause 9. Next one, position in the revised code. It says that, as I said, ensuring compliance with the provisions of section 225 of the Companies Act, where you had to be technically removed, that has found a place. Section 224 and 225 of Companies Act 1956 has found a suitable place in section 139 and section 140 of the Companies Act 2013. And changes in clause 9 is subject to legislative amendment by Parliament, obviously, because that has to be changed in Parliament. But if you will find the same provisions of 224 and 225 appearing in section 139 and 140 of the Companies Act 2013. Next. Director simpliciter, I think I have already covered, but I would just, for the sake of repetition, a director simpliciter is one who is not a managing director or whole-time director and is required only to attend board meetings of the company and not paid any remuneration except for attending such meetings. That is, only for appointing, only for attending sitting fees, nothing more than that. Next, HUF versus member in practice. Even if you are Karta, you can remain in a Karta, but you cannot, it must result from the inheritance, succession, partition of the family business, and only after specific and prior approval of the council. Karta cannot have active role, and attest function is not permitted. And clarification is that incorporate that a member engaged as Karta of a HUF doing family business will be within the limit prescribed by the council, as it makes investments from the funds pertaining to HUF only, provided he is not actively engaged in the management of the said business. So he has a very limited role to play, because why these cases come up, there was one peculiar case. There was one chartered accountant in practice, and he was the only child, and his parents were the only directors of a company and shareholders of a company. And both the parents were flying from one place to the other, and the plane crashed, and both the parents died. Now this chartered accountant was in practice. He had his own firm. Now this company suddenly was in doldrums because there was no director, no shareholder. Then the particular chartered accountant in practice wrote to the institute, and the institute gave him a permission for 6 months to appoint 2 directors, including himself. So another director had to be appointed, because in those days there was no concept of 1% company under the 1956 Act. So he appointed one of his relatives and himself for 6 months, which was further extended to another 6 months. And after 1 year, the institute told that you can run, but you have to find out another director and you have to come out of it. You can be a director simpliciter, but you cannot be a managing director or a whole-time director. You can remain a director, but you should only be looking after you should not be looking after the day-to-day affairs of the company. Similarly, in the case of HUF also, you can only be permitted to make investments of the funds, but you cannot be responsible. You cannot engage yourself in any business of the HUF. Next, Devan, and kindly mute others, please. I think someone is, yeah. Yes. Now, position in the revised code, this says, yes, this I already mentioned, cooling off period. A member to be not to be the auditor of a company for a period of 2 years from the date of completion of his tenure as director. That I've already mentioned earlier. Next, let us go to the next slide. This I think was not in the advertisement guidelines. I think I'm getting those advertisement guidelines changes in the revised code. Can you go to the next slide? Yes, next one. There is a table, I think. Yes, the table here. This is the table. Advertisement guidelines. What are the present advertisement guidelines? Look at the new portion. It shall be honest and truthful, obviously. There shall be no exaggerated claims of the services offered by the member. The write-up should not be of a nature that may bring the profession to disrepute. The write-up should not contain testimonials or endorsements concerning members or names of clients, both past and present. It must not be violative of any provisions. It should not be. It should not be violative of any provisions of the Chartered Accountants Act 1949. It should not. The font size should not exceed 14. The font size should not exceed 14, and the write-up should not contain any information about the achievements, awards given by the central or state governments in regulatory bodies or any other position held or any accreditations given by the organizations, and so on and so forth. So it has to be simple, factual in nature, not increasing a font size of 14, where you only mention about yourself and nothing else. Next slide, Devan. Section 140, it said that cost auditor, chartered accountant can also do the functions of cost auditor, but now it is it may not be done, because it cannot be done because section 148 of the Companies Act clearly states that chartered accountants has to be appointed. Cost accountants can be appointed as cost auditors under section 148 of the Companies Act. And minimum fees, we have already, there was one minimum fee in the earlier law that has been replaced by the minimum audit fees that I mentioned just now. Kindly go to the next slide. মিশন স্টেটমেন্ট, হ্যাঁ একটু এক মিনিট একটু এ দাও তো, এই চার্জটা লো হয়ে যাচ্ছে, হ্যাঁ চার্জটা দাও, হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ আচ্ছা। So these are basically what I thought I would share. Another issue I would like to share, because I have shared communication part, which is a bone of litigation always. I have shared the tendering part, which is an issue which covers everyone. The third issue which I would like to cover here, most important, I've covered the advertisement guidelines, which is very important. Another issue which I would like to cover here is that many cases when there are proprietorship firms, then the proprietorship, after the death of the proprietorship firms suddenly die a natural death, because what happens is there is no one to take over. So what can be done is, whenever a proprietor dies, the firm name is kept freezed by the institute automatically for a period of 1 year, and within the period of 1 year, if the widow of the proprietor contacts any other person who is in practice who wants to take over the firm and pays the widow a goodwill, then it can be done, but there has to be a proper goodwill agreement. A proper agreement has to be entered into, and that has to be registered with the institute. That has to the institute will come to know about that agreement, and the institute will approve that agreement, and accordingly the goodwill can be paid to the widow of the firm, and the firm can be taken over by someone. So that will help the widow of the deceased proprietor to a great extent. It is very much there in the Code of Ethics. It was there since 1998 actually, but many people are not aware of this. So if you have any friends of yours or who are proprietors, you kindly inform them that if a situation arises, then the widow should not approach the institute, or someone, a chartered accountant in practice can approach the concerned widow of the deceased partner, of the deceased member, and can take over the firm after paying a goodwill to the deceased widow, to the widow of the deceased member. In the case of a partnership also, a partnership deed could be prepared in such a manner that the widow, because you cannot share profits with a non-member. So what can happen is that there could be a partnership deed where for a limited period the widow can be given the powers, but it has to be mentioned in the partnership deed, where the widow can be given limited powers to admit a partner of his or her of her choice, or his choice nowadays also, into the partnership if a partner is no more, or if a partner dies. But that has to be clearly mentioned in the partnership deed. It cannot happen just like that without any provisions. No one can include any chartered accountant. No one can include a chartered accountant in practice nominated by the widow of the deceased partner. So this is another important provision which I thought I would cover. And lastly, as far as the disciplinary mechanism is concerned, just 5 minutes before I conclude and go to the questions, because the thank you slide has come. The volume 3 I'm not covering because it deals case laws. It requires a different program altogether to discuss clause by clause of volume 3 and volume 2. This was only an overview and a nutshell, but disciplinary mechanism I will just cover in brief. There are two types of committees which exist in the institute. One is called Board of Discipline under Section 21A of the CA Act, and there is something called a disciplinary committee under Section 21B of the CA Act. Now 21A normally deals with litigation between a chartered accountant and another chartered accountant, where 95% of the cases are due to non-communication by the incoming auditor with the previous auditor. So those cases are tried in under 21A under Board of Discipline. And the punishments that can be awarded, there are three types of punishments that can be awarded. It is a removal of membership fee for a maximum period of 3 months, or a penalty which can extend up to 1 lakh, or reprimand. So it could be either a reprimand or a penalty which cannot exceed 1 lakh, or removal from partnership which can not exceed 3 months. And it could be either one of such punishment or a combination of two, or a combination of all three. That is Board of Discipline. Disciplinary committee and the Board of Discipline deals with Schedule 1 offenses only. Schedule 1 offenses only, because as I said, Schedule maybe I had skipped and I had forgotten to say, Schedule 1 offenses have got 19 clauses and Schedule 2 has got 15 clauses. So Schedule 1 offenses are normally less serious clauses which are dealt with by the Board of Discipline. The Schedule 2 clauses are dealt with by the disciplinary committee, and for Schedule 1 clauses, the Board of Discipline, there can be 2 members of the council who will be members of the Board of Discipline, and 1 government nominee also has to be there. But for the purpose of quorum, presence of 2 persons is enough. And even if the government nominee is absent, there is no requirement of the quorum of the meeting to be rendered defective, because say for instance, if the government nominee is absent on that particular day of the hearing, then the other 2 council members will form the quorum and can continue the proceedings. And as far as the disciplinary committee is concerned, Schedule 2 offenses are normally tried, which are more serious in nature, where a certain organization or the auditee has complained against the auditor for gross negligence, maybe under Schedule 7 of Part 2 of Clause 2. Those are serious offenses. Gross negligence is the most serious offense, and there are other offenses also under those 15 clauses. But the point I'm trying to drive home is that there it is a 5-member bench, and out of the 5-member bench, 2 are government nominees and 3 are council members, which normally includes the president of the institute and 2 other council members, and 2 are government nominees. Out of the 5 members, the quorum required is 3. So in order to render a meeting to be not defective and proper and regular, you need a quorum of 3 people. Out of that, there has to be the presence of at least 2 two government nominees are necessary for the quorum to be there. So two government nominees have to be present for the quorum to be. I'm sorry, the presence of one government nominee is compulsory for the quorum to be formed, and there could be other members as well. And if for any for any instance the presiding officer is normally the president of the institute, but if he is absent for some reason, then the senior-most government nominee becomes the presiding officer for that meeting, and he will be conducting the proceedings of the committee. And one more thing I would like to say, that as I said, the serious offenses are dealt with there, and the punishments that are the minimum punishments or the punishments that are mentioned against a violation of Schedule 2 is either a reprimand or a penalty which cannot exceed 5 lakhs, or it could be a removal from membership, which could go on for life. In other words, the punishments are reprimand or a penalty of an amount which cannot exceed 5 lakhs, or removal till life, for life. So it could either be one punishment or a combination of two or more punishments. And yes, and one more thing which I thought I would mention here is yes, so these are the offences, Schedule 1 and 2. There are other offences also, Schedule 3 and 4, other misconduct and so on and so forth, because members in service now also can be tried for other misconduct as well, and especially with the coming of NOCLAR, which has assumed a lot of significance, although deferred for the time being. The employees of the various clients should also be very careful while discharging their functions, because at any point of time, if a violation is found of any of laws or regulations involving having financial, commercial and economic impact on the organization, then they can be tried too. So with these words, I think I've more or less tried to explain all the provisions of the Code of Ethics. It is 12:40. I've spoken for around 1.5 hours, as I had promised earlier. Now the floor is yours. You can ask questions, and I hand over to Devan, who is present, to moderate the questions accordingly. Thank you very much to you all for giving me a patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would request the members present who are attending this program. So if you have any question, you can either unmute yourself and raise the query, or you may write also in the chat box.
Okay, I do have some queries.
Yes, please.
See, as regards the tender, sometimes what happens that I participate in a tender and I give the lowest quote, but I do not get the assignment. Somebody else gets the assignment. Is there any remedy for that? And sometimes what happens that the client says that they are not ready to, they reserve the right for not assigning the lowest quote person. That is their right. So is that correct or not?
It is an internal audit assignment or a statutory audit assignment?
It can happen in both.
Well, actually, what has happened is, what can happen is, many auditees have a system called QCBS, quality cum cost basis. So what they do is, suppose it happens in almost all government organizations, most of them. What happens, 70 marks are reserved for technical competence of the firm, and 30% marks are reserved for price, because people have also come to understand that at times people quote low fees and get away, and then the quality is not ensured and all. I'm not saying it can happen to you or anyone, nothing to be it is not any personal remark which I'm making. What I'm mentioning is, if it could be say for instance 70% they mark you separately and 70% is for technical competence and 30% is for price competence, and they make a grand total, and then accordingly they give it to the lower firm, lowest possible, the person who has scored the highest, sorry. But it has to be mentioned in the tender document that you are doing so. It will be on QCBS. But if it is on least cost basis, if it is on least cost basis and minimum audit fees is mentioned in the statutory, if it is a statutory audit and minimum audit fees is mentioned, and you have not been assigned an audit even with a least cost method, then you can obviously, since the auditee is a government, is a public authority, you can always go through RTI, and you can always challenge the decision if you feel that you have given the lowest quote, which is equal to or more than the minimum audit fees. Once again, I'm mentioning it cannot be less than the minimum audit fees in the case of statutory audit. However, in the case of internal audit, minimum audit fees is not applicable, so you can quote anything, whatever you want. And if you are convinced that your quote is the lowest, then you can obviously through RTI, because most of these auditees are public authorities, and they have a what you call a public information of PIO they call, and there is a if you want to appeal against the PIO, you can go to the CPIO also. So there is a proper RTI system in place. You can complain against such clients through the RTI mechanism as well, if you are convinced.
Can't it be informed to ICAI?
Yes, what can happen is here, what you can do is, at first you should communicate with the client and try to get information, because in any case, if you have to because since the client has done this misconduct, I would say, and the client is not under the purview of the CA Act and regulations, so they cannot actually move against the client for that matter. Who can move against under the RTI? If you find anyone, and in RTI, if it is evident that he has not rightfully given you the assignment, then you can move to the particular ministry under which that particular body is has allotted the audit to someone. Say for instance, Ministry of Fisheries. So suppose there is a body which has not allotted you the audit, so you can complain to the Ministry of Fisheries with all the documents and papers. In this case, the problem is you cannot also if you are unjustifiedly removed from somewhere, you can, in addition to moving against the previous auditor, apart from moving against the incoming auditor, not the previous auditor, you can also write to the Ethical Standards Board. Electronically 1,000 rupees fee is there for unjustified removal of auditors also, because the Ethical Standards Board is picking up those cases quite fast. So you can go for a double whammy. You can complain against the incoming auditor, and as well against the client you can write for unjustified removal of auditors. But in that case, it will tantamount, it has to be a removal then only. But in your case, directly you cannot hold that client guilty for not, because he is not coming under the purview of the CA Act and regulations.
Understood.
Understood.
Can I ask you another question?
Please, sir. Please.
If a cost auditor, if a cost accountant is taken as a partner of the firm, can that firm be also the cost auditor? Can do the undertake the cost audit?
Yes, that what has happened is, this has come in the public domain 15 days back only. I think you have also seen that exposure draft where they are saying they have revised Form 18 actually. That Form 18 which we have been filing while taking partners and all, There they are writing cost accountant, company secretary, they are also writing, and it is in public domain, and 45 days time has been given for public opinion. So public comments means normally CAs and cost accountants and others will comment. So you can also comment, actually, Kolanda, you can also comment. So
Right,
I think the time has not come. Let the comments come. Let the law be formulated. It will take some time, 2-3 months time at least, if not more. Then obviously you have a valid question, because section 148 we have to carefully read. And obviously if we have a cost accountant, obviously we should be allowed to take cost audit under section 148, because we have a cost auditor in our not as an employee, because you may be having a cost accountant as an employee, but you so far you didn't have a cost accountant who could sign a cost audit report. So that should happen, but that it will be too premature to answer this question at this point.
Understood.
Yes.
And one more question that
Yes.
as regards advertisement, I think if anybody else wants to raise some question, then I should not ask all the questions.
No. You raise the next other questions will come. No problem. You finish your.
As regards the advertisement is concerned, so if we forward our farm profile to some clients, where actually we mention our past experience and what kind of services we provide.
Yes.
It
It is not actually a violation. They only say that don't make any roving inquiries. In other words, you must have seen the code earlier also. If you are aware of a particular panel, you are aware that such and such auditee maintains a panel of chartered accountants. Then you can send your profile requesting to include you in the panel, but not requesting them to allot you work. But if you are not aware that a panel exists, and you write and you send your CV to include in the panel, and the auditee wishes to complain against the institute, then there could be problems. But if you are aware of that they maintain a panel, but it is not in public domain, maybe someone else has told, some of your chartered accountant friends have told you, shown you papers having an empanelment number, whether they've allotted or not, that is a different issue. Then you can obviously write. I don't think no one can haul you up for that is not a violation to my mind.
Okay.
Yes.
See, my last question is about that NOCLAR.
Yes.
See, NOCLAR, it appears that chartered accountants are to be all chartered accountant practicing chartered accountant should be Nani Palkiwala or Harish Salve. So that's really not possible.
Yes.
That how I do not know how many
No, see, Kolanda, civil laws, criminal laws, if it gets affected, we are not responsible. But commercial and economic laws is a very important thing. Let me also tell you, in the CA final syllabus under elective papers, now the CA final new syllabus, we didn't study in our time, but now in the CA final syllabus under elective papers, paper 6, elective papers has one full paper on commercial and economic laws, which has laws on, I will tell you, RERA, FEMA, PMLA, FCRA, Banning of Unregulated Deposit Schemes Act 2019, the various codes of wages, that 4 codes have come. I think you attended that code. I think we had a program where Dr. Alok Rai spoke on code, which was very interesting. Yes. So those codes are also coming into force. So these are commercial and economic laws having direct financial impact. So there, say for instance, the workmen of a particular company, they find that after the audit report has come, there are shareholders who represent workmen also. You are aware of that.
Yeah.
There, if these workmen decide and say that the auditor has not complied with certain things which directly affect, and the company can get away by not paying a particular liability, so on and so forth, then it can be damaging and dangerous. So let us not get into laws which we know there, like the government also had forgotten at the time of Corona that in 1897 there was an Epidemic Diseases Act, 1897. The government had also forgotten that there was an act like that. And at that point of time, you must remember that the health workers were being manhandled by people who were going to test in the slums and thickly populated areas. In order to protect the health workers, they had to invoke the Epidemic Diseases Act in 1897 through an ordinance, because Parliament was not in session. We did not be a Manipalkiwala or a Rajet Pelani, but what are the list given by the institute is only illustrative, I can say, not exhaustive. So, but if you normally maintain, I think institute should come out with more guidelines when NOCLAR will really be made effective, because now it has been kept in abeyance. So if we follow the guidance note of the institute, what the beauty of a guidance note is, the advantage of a guidance note is that if you follow, then the institute cannot haul you up. But if you don't follow, because a guidance note is not compulsory in the sense, it is your discretion whether you will follow or not follow a guidance note, because it is not a statement or a standard. A statement and a standard is mandatory. A guidance, if you look at the authority attached to every document of the institute, you will find that a guidance note is not mandatory, but it is up to the judgment of the member to follow or not follow. So if you follow, no one can catch you in the wrong foot. But if you don't follow, then the institute can haul you up and say that you have messed up the situation, and some violation has been reported against you, for which we have to move against you through the disciplinary mechanism. So I'm sure that for better administration of NOCLAR, as you rightly pointed out, the list of laws and a gist of all the laws and the executive summaries of all the laws, because you keep on reading, you can't keep on reading because you have to work. So the important provisions which affect financial statements of a particular law should be there. It is a very good suggestion also, I would say. And I will definitely talk to because I was also a member of the commercial and economic laws last year of the institute. So I would definitely take it up so that members are not inconvenienced when NOCLAR really becomes a reality and mandatory. Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Kolanda. Any other question? Anyone? চ্যাট বক্সে কিছু আছে দেবান?
There is nothing in the chat box, sir.
আচ্ছা, আর তাহলে অন্য কিছু আর কেউ যদি কিছু থাকে বলতে পারে, নালে তো একটা প্রায় বাজে বোধহয় নাকি 12:54। আর যদি কারো থাকে, অভিজিৎ দা কিছু কোয়েশ্চেন আছে? অভিজিৎ দা বলে মিউট করা আছে, যাই হোক, ঠিক আছে। দেবান কিছু
না, মিউট করেনি
এখন আনমিউট ঠিক আছে। তো যাই হোক, যতখানি সম্ভব আমরা চেষ্টা করেছি টু আপডেট মেম্বার্স অন কোড অফ এথিক্স, ইম্পর্টেন্ট প্রভিশন।
What is KYC as we were talking about?
KYC টা হচ্ছে যে কি হচ্ছে, ওয়াক ইন ক্লায়েন্ট কখনো নেবার চেষ্টা করবেন না। ওয়াক ইন ক্লায়েন্ট অনেক সময় আসে, অনেকে ফোন করে বলে আপনার খবরটা এটা না কোথায় একটা পেলাম জানেন, জাস্ট ডায়ালে পেলাম, এরকম সব ফোন করে অনেক সময়। আমি সেক্টর 5 থেকে ফোন করছি, আপনারা তো জিএসটি করেন, ইনকাম ট্যাক্স করেন, অডিট করেন, আপনারা যদি একটু আসেন তাহলে কথা, মানে এগুলো কিন্তু সব ওয়াক ইন ক্লায়েন্টস বা ওরা এমনি আসতে চায়। এবার এলো, এসে আপনি অবভিয়াসলি দ্য ফার্স্ট কোয়েশ্চেন দ্যাট শুড কাম টু ইউর মাইন্ড ইজ আপনি আমাকে জানলেন কি করে, কোন রেফারেন্সে আপনি, কোনো না কোনো রেফারেন্স একটা থাকবেই কোনো এক্সিস্টিং ক্লায়েন্টের বাইরে। কারণ দেখা গেছে, সবসময়ই দেখা গেছে যে it has always been found, I should speak in English because there could be others who may not understand Bengali. So it has been observed that there are many clients who have very dubious credentials. They come and try to do the audit, and they said, I had an auditor who has become very old, he is unable to do. Then if you go through the last 3 balance sheets, you will find that he has changed auditors every year. So he is a person who is always rotating amongst auditors. The auditors are not rotating, he is rotating amongst auditors because he has always some things to hide. So we have to take a proper KYC, not only reference, but proper Aadhaar, proper PAN, proper other documentation, proper means the person should be a credible person. Because I have seen many chartered accountants. I'm telling you, I'll give you another example. say you are the statutory auditor of a particular, you're not a statutory auditor of a particular client, and suddenly a client walks into your office and says, I have got a certification to be given, and now certification does not require any communication with the previous person who has communicated or has done the certification. So I want to get the certificate done. So by getting this certificate, I will get some subsidy from the government and all those things. It has got production figures and things like that, if you kindly certify and all, so on and so forth. So what you should do, you should say that, firstly, you should say that who is your statutory auditor? Because why that person didn't go to the statutory auditor? Because the requirement must have been that you get it from a chartered accountant in practice. So why you didn't go to that statutory auditor? Because he has got something to hide from that. He is trying to fudge figures and give some other figures and try to manage a signature from you. So we should say, who is your statutory auditor? If we find, then he said, why aren't you going there? Then he will obviously say that he is very sick and I cannot contact him. I called him 10 times. He's not. Okay, fine. I can do it, but I will visit your factory. I'll visit your and I will see whether production records are there, whether you have, if there is a bank loan, what are the book debt statements and other statements that you submit. So there has to be a proper check actually. That is very important. I have found, I was in the disciplinary committee for 2 years in the institute, and believe me, Kolanda, I have seen many cases where young chartered accountants have fallen, they have fallen to this trap where they have certified things where it should have been done by statutory auditors in general. I have seen senior people not falling in this trap because they have the maturity and the experience to understand. But there were many people who may have entered practice and they have not put in, say, a large number of years into practice. So this is very dangerous also. So a KYC in general, your sixth sense should always work whenever we sign, because our signature is very precious. Even the Prime Minister also, whatever he has said this, that our signature is very precious. So that way, by signing this, we may fall in trouble, and we make the government fall into trouble also by giving some false subsidies and all, which that person doesn't deserve. So that way, KYC is very important.
Yes. My last question.
Yes.
Can a CA attest a document of a student, CA student, or any other fellow chartered accountants documents? Can he attest?
বুঝলাম না, স্টুডেন্টস মানে কি রকম?
স্টুডেন্টরা কখনো কখনো আসে যে আমার এই বিকম এর সার্টিফিকেটটা একটু অ্যাটেস্ট করে দিন।
হ্যাঁ, ওটা because it is a requirement of the institute also maybe. And if you see the original and find the normally it is required by institute while filing form 103, or suppose he is trying to take permission to study another course, form 112, that is required. So there is, I don't think there will be any problem. Only you can keep a copy of the attested certificate in your in a file which you maintain in your office file, that what you have certified. But you can also write there, this certificate has been issued for the limited purpose of the requirement, because nowadays people also say, if you self-attest your PAN and Aadhaar also, you should write the purpose. So you can write the purpose also underneath it. I don't think that will be a problem. হ্যাঁ, দেবাশিস কিছু বলবে নাকি? না, দেবাশিস কিছু বলবে না। দেবাশিস সরকারও এসেছিল, আমি ভাবলাম ও কিছু বলবে। আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে অভিজিৎ দা, থ্যাংক ইউ ভেরি মাচ ওয়ান্স अगेन।
Thank you.
Over to Devan for formally closing. যদি দেবান চাই কিছু বলতে।
So I have nothing to add. It has been a wonderful seminar. You have deliberated on the important issues that we need to know as chartered accountants, and we are now also updated about many important things like the multidisciplinary partnership and other important things like NOCLAR and the changes that have taken place, like allowing chartered accountants to become insolvency professionals, registered valuers. So I think overall we have been enriched with the knowledge of code of ethics which generally we tend to avoid, or maybe we do not get the time to take care of it. Only when we are in a problem, only then we come to know that yes, we are already in a problem. But I think even we should keep holding similar programs. Like even on the volume 3, you said that
Yes.
the case laws would require another day. So maybe we should also know about them. So we
Yes,
should also
yes,
hold similar programs in the future where the volume 3 is discussed. Before I uh, before we close this program, I would request the convener of the study circle, the Abhijit Datta sir, to speak something or offer a vote of thanks to the speaker of the day.
Devan, Suman is there and Suman will give the vote of thanks.
Okay.
It's,
All
it's
right.
due-
শোন ডাক্তার দেখি এসে গেছো?
Thank you, Abhijit. Thank you, the convener of the study
no
circle.
mention, please. No mention.
And CS Sumanto from he has given a very elaborate explanation of the ethics, code of ethics, and this is a burning issue for us because everybody wants us to be act like a big four charter accountant, but having the manpower of having a manpower of small firms, it is very difficult. So many of the times we get entangled in many of the ethical issues which may come into our knowledge after we have done the issue. Now with the automation, many of the things which could be resolved in future in the past times cannot be resolved in these technical times because it is all recorded in an online basis. Like now for the last 2 days we are having problem. The people who have not get their payment done to the portal are facing issues for creating the UDIN. And also this UDIN has a long lasting effect because I was discussing on this issue with Sumantada last night, and we are talking about that if somebody's membership is cancelled from 1st April 2020, he had not paid up to from 30 up to 31st December, and it will reserve from 3rd January 2021. Then what will be the cases where the UDIN he has already generated during the issue? If he does not continue with the membership, and if he continues with the membership.
Sumanda, regarding this, let me just
Clarify.
tell you that if the membership gets cancelled in a year, so like you have given the example of the current year. So one member had been having his enjoying the membership since 1st April, and he is supposed to pay it by 30th September. The extended date this time was 31st December. So if he is restoring his membership, there is no gap at all. The membership gets restored originally. However, if this membership is not paid till 31st March 2021, and then he goes on to pay it on 1st April, then that membership will get restored on 1st April 2021. So if he pays on 17th April 2021, it gets restored on 17th April 2021. And then there is a gap.
Yes, regarding this, my technical issue is not regarding the date. Yes, say for example, if
so
this
all the UDINs are valid. So because there is no gap.
all right.
If it
That
is
was my
restored by 31st March of the same year.
If anybody does not pay by 31st March, and if he pays by
then everything,
There is a gap.
technically everything gets
yes,
invalid.
1st April. So with this, I'll thank Sumanto who has taken us so his time, and also Devan, busy schedule of his being RCM of our region, and Abhijit for taking up all of your time, and also thanks all the participants, and all happy New Year to all of them. And with this, I conclude this meeting and call it an end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
নেক্সট মিটিং কবে?
দেখা যাক, সে অভিজিৎ দা বলবেন, অভিজিৎ দা